Mr. Chairman and members, for the record, I'm Christi Craddick, Chairman of the Railroad Commission of Texas. Our jurisdiction covers oil and gas production from the wellhead to pipeline safety inspections. We regulate coal mines, site remediation, hydrogen, and oversee gas utilities. We also handle geothermal permitting, uranium mines, and are seeking primacy from the EPA to be the sole regulator on carbon capture and underground storage. So with your permission, I'd like to highlight some of the achievements we've made as an agency over the interim in regard to implementing regulatory standards based on direction we've received from the legislature last session. And I'll also touch on some of the critical needs the Commission is seeking this legislative session.
Please proceed.
First, the Commission adopted new rules last year to implement SB 786, sponsored by Chairman Darby last session, which transferred regulatory authority of closed-loop geothermal injection wells to the Railroad Commission from TCEQ. While TCEQ retains jurisdiction over shallow-loop geothermal injection wells, all other types of geothermal injection wells are now under the Railroad Commission's authority. The Railroad Commission has had enforcement primacy from the EPA over geothermal injection wells since 1982, so we've just updated some rulemaking. Just last month, the Commission adopted statewide Rule 82, implementing the requirements of SB 1186 by Senator Hughes and Chairman Darby. This clarifies the Commission's jurisdiction over brine mining under state law. SB 1186 clarified that the agency's jurisdiction over brine mining includes the authority to regulate brine production wells and spent brine return injection wells used for mining of elements such as lithium. The new rule allows the Commission to seek primary enforcement authority from the EPA for the spent brine return injection wells, which are Class 5 UIC wells. We're working on that application. Next, thanks to the leadership of fellow Commissioner Jim Wright, and as a result of legislation passed last session by Senator Nichols and Senator Perry, we adopted a significant overhaul of rules regulating oil and gas waste management facilities in Texas. It's the first overhaul of Railroad Commission's waste management rules in 40 years. These rules help continue to safeguard groundwater and surface water while adapting to modern management practices such as recycling produced water and recent advancements in production methods. The adopted rules enhance the agency's oversight of waste management facilities, and we now have staff dedicated to environmental permit compliance, a team that reviews waste management facility reports and inspections and follows up on those reviews to quickly rectify any issues. The oil and gas industry has evolved dramatically since the 1980s, and these updated rules are the result of thoughtful and thorough deliberation from the public, agency experts, and industry stakeholders, and they allow industry to continue driving economic growth while upholding our commitment to protect public safety and the environment. Next, under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, the EPA regulates the injection of fluids underground, but may delegate their authority to enforce the Underground Injection Control Program, or UIC program. Until a state receives primacy, the EPA directly implements the UIC program through its regional offices. In 2010, the EPA created a Class 6 well class specifically to regulate the injection of CO2 into deep subsurface rock formations. The year prior, Texas established a statutory framework for projects involving the capture, injection, sequestration, or storage of CO2. The statutes require the state to pursue primacy for Class 6 UIC program. The Commission adopted initial regulations to implement the Class 6 UIC program in 2010 and amended those regulations in 2022 and again in 2023 to reflect changes in statutes and to ensure that the state's program meets the minimum federal requirements for Class 6 wells. We originally submitted our application for primacy for Class 6 wells in December of 2022, had been working with the last administration's EPA to complete the final application package. However, in November of last year, We withdrew that application to make some modifications under this new White House guidelines. We resubmitted that application to EPA's Region 6 on February 20th, 2025. So we're hopeful we're moving back along. And the last couple of things I want to highlight, Chairman Darby again passed an HB 2847 last session, which tasked the Commission with providing regulatory recommendations on hydrogen production. In response, we formed the Texas Hydrogen Production Policy Council, which produced its first report to the legislature in December. We're happy to share it with you all if you did not receive a copy. After a year of extensive analysis, the Council has provided recommendations to leverage Texas's existing regulatory structure to lead the charge on hydrogen policy. The report also specifies areas where there's room for enhancement or a need for new frameworks and highlights the potential opportunities tied to hydrogen industry growth in the state. So while this highlights the major action items our agencies addressed, I'd like to talk about our appropriations needs. I know I've visited with most of y'all, just so you'll know as you're talking to members on the floor. In regard to the Railroad Commission budget this cycle, we're requesting funding for several critical initiatives, produced water and injection data systems of $7.6 million. This would support the industry efforts on recycled produced water, reducing waste, and improving resource management. It'd give us more data as we're working on produced water issues. The second thing that I want to highlight is oil and gas authorized pit registration system. I just said we updated the rule. We want to make sure that we include a better update as we're implementing that rule. We have a tracking system and oversight of pits used in oil and gas operations and make sure we're enhancing environmental protections. The third thing is oversight and safety regulatory filing system. These are all IT, by the way. We want to do an online gas utility annual reports. Today we get 10,000 pages annually, and we want to make sure that we streamline that I'm not keystroking things in, and improve our data accessibility. We'd like to have an additional 10 people for underground injection well investigation team. We've got some great people over there, but they're used to putting rules in place and enforcing those rules. We don't have the ability really to look at reservoir scale pressures and seismic events. We need some more good people. Site remediation support, as some of you know, we also not just clean up orphaned abandoned wells, but clean up site remediation, so we'd like to have some additional people. And then the big ask that a lot of you've seen, we're asking for $100 million additional for orphan well plugging. That's due to increased cost. The average cost per well has surged since you started helping us, Chairman Darby, 8 years ago, from $15,000 to our average cost is about $57,000 per well. And we also have a lot of emergency wells. Emergency wells alone this year already have consumed nearly 40% of our budget, and we had 5 that we added to emergency wells that we added to our world last Friday. This funding will help address high-risk wells, manage emergencies, and reduce our backlogs. So, in closing, I'm proud of the progress we've made this year, and we're looking forward to what we do in the future, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Sounds like we gave you a lot of work to do in the interim, and you've faithfully performed that work by implementing the rules and establishing those policy groups and councils. So thank you for all of that. Members, I will recognize Wee Way, who's Executive Director of the Railroad Commission, present, and if you have any questions, I'm sure he would be more than willing to try to answer those. I will submit to you that we have that hydrogen report is in your drop boxes. So if you'd like to review, that's in your drop boxes. I do have a comment and a question. As you and I discussed when you came up before the meeting, we've got a seismicity problem. There was a 4.8 earthquake in Ackerley, Texas, and although I was in San Angelo over the weekend and present during that period of time, I did not actually feel it myself, but I'm kind of hard to move from time to time. but others have lit me up over it and want to know what I'm going to do about it. And so I'll just pass that question on down. Just tell us what we're going to, I think back, was it 15 in which we had the Azle earthquake and the Metplex, and we implemented the permanent seismicity arrays. Was it 15?
2013.
13. Okay. Wade, come on up. Once we ask you questions, please state your name for the record.
2013, you're correct. So, yes, sir. Look, seismicity's been an issue basically since I've been at the commission. One of the couple of things that we have done, and you're correct, we had one up just 27 miles north of Midland on Friday. My phone lit up. We'd had one the day before that was a 3.4. So we had two. Nobody felt the 3.4, but everybody felt the 4.7. So what we have done over the weekend and starting Friday, we send inspectors out. It's outside of the an SRA, which I'll go into that in just a minute, but I'm going to finish this part of the question. There are 11 deep disposal wells that we have asked to shut in, and we are doing an inspection to see if we can identify where the problem came from for this. So what we have done since 2013 is a little bit of background. We hired a state seismologist. We're now on number 2. We share some time with the gentleman. He's a professor at UTEP. We've hired a few extra people, but we could use some more. You heard in my budget request because of this. And a lot of it has to do with produced water. But with the other things that we have done, we now as an agency and have worked with industry to establish seismic response areas. We have 3 in West Texas, one by Stanton, one out by the airport in Midland, and one further out in Reeves County, Pecos area. We've worked with industry, and in those areas, we make sure that we are limiting the volumes of disposal, as well as we have made most everybody, if not everybody, shallow up, because what we now understand is deep disposal is causing some of the seismic issues. We would love for y'all as an industry is asking us for help to we would love for y'all to figure out how we're going to do produced water, because disposing of it is not the best option anymore. We also have some challenges with our friends to the north, and I mean that New Mexico. They're sending a lot of water to Texas as well, and so I know your work, that was one of your priorities I noticed that you brought up, so we appreciate that. Look, we spend a lot of time monitoring seismic. We spend a lot of time on produced water at this agency, and both are important. We're also, frankly, working with other agencies like TCEQ to figure out how we can figure out standards with produced water. So we as an agency have allowed some I would say some companies to go out and figure out what they're going to do with produced water for beneficial use. We now believe it needs to go back to TCQ for water standards so we can move that process along. So you're seeing 2 agencies really work a lot together and working with industry a lot. That's great. I just want you, for the record, state your name and who you represent, and your
Chairman.
position on the proceedings.
For the record, Wade Wayne, the Executive Director of the Commission.
Thank you. In 2013, clearly there was some seismicity activity in the Metroplex area, and buildings shook in Irving, Texas, and we were in a committee meeting when that happened. And of course, the concern was that you wanted to have the data to drive the discussion rather than emotions. And so we created the permanent seismicity through the Bureau of Economic Geology at UT. And then we also implemented mobile arrays. Mm-hmm. From both of your standpoints, do we now have enough data that you're able to determine, or our seismologist is able to determine more precisely the areas where these earthquakes are happening in the geologic area and the faulting in that area, to give you what you need to make these value judgments on where that produced water can be injected and what pressures it can be injected? Yes and no. So Bureau of Economic Geology has been a good partner with us.
They are still collecting data. We want to move a lot of that data over to us. We appreciate that they are still doing modeling, and we need them to continue to do that. We want the data faster, which is why we're asking to create our own system and to add to their system. We want to get more pressure, more volumes, where that water is coming from, who's involved with that water. So we want to expand that system from when we started. Hence the reason we're trying, as we are developing our UIC project and moving it off our mainframe into the cloud. That is part of what we want to expand. So that's part. The other part though is yes, in the fact that we do have more seismometers on the ground. We are getting more data, but we still we can't tell you with a straight face we know where the issues are going to be. Did I know we were going to have an earthquake on Friday before I had to show up here on Monday? No. And at noon, I'm on the phone saying to staff, you better have an answer by the time I hit Monday, right? But I think between us, industry, researchers, we are in better shape than we were when we started. We do know some of the causes. It also, even if we're out inspecting today and we identify a specific well or two wells or area, it could take 12 to 18 months for us, even if we shut them in today, for that some of that seismicity to subside. So it's not a tomorrow. We know that some of our programs some of what we do are working. These seismic response areas are working because we aren't having the earthquakes in Stanton anymore like we were, or by the Midland Airport. That is really improved, as well as the numbers have improved out in Reeves County. So we know that there's some real positive. Our biggest challenge is figuring out how we manage seismic, but still allow the biggest oil field in the world to continue to produce. So again, the answer really is what we do better and what the policies come out with produced water.
And you're exactly right. It is a balance because we have to have the industry and the hydrocarbons that it produces, but there's a byproduct that we've got to deal with also. Do you think in your budget request before the legislature this session that you've included those costs for advancing technology and or staffing that will allow you to understand the seismicity issue better and be able to better direct your commission's policies to handle that balance that we need to have?
That's our ask, and that's our goal. Yes, sir. If we get those resources, we think it moves us another step down the road. Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. What's your thoughts on fixing our inactive and orphan well problem in this state? In 20 words or less. Maybe 20,000 words or less.
We asked for $100 million to plug some wells.
Okay.
How's that?
Well, that's just that's the money part.
That's right.
But what are we going to do? How are we going to, and what will that do for us? Please give this committee the benefit of, I understand the amount of money and the ask, but tell me what you're going to do with it. So
today we have 400,000 active and inactive wells. It's going to be more than 20 words, by the way. Today, 250,000 of those are active, 155,000 are inactive. We, as an agency, as most of y'all know, if a well becomes orphaned or abandoned, meaning, for instance, somebody goes bankrupt or they die, they walk away, those wells come under our books. Today, I have 8,500 wells on my books. We, as an agency, for the last 8 years, have been given additional dollars. Chairman Darby, you were a big piece of that to make sure we got additional dollars to plug orphaned, abandoned wells. Our metric's been 1,000 a year. We've hit that metric every single year. One of the things we've recognized in the last year, two things. One, the cost to plug those wells has tripled, and we haven't come back and asked for additional dollars, so we need to be able, we've been borrowing from ourselves to be able to manage it. We can't go over our budget anymore. The second piece that's been a challenge, that it continues to be a challenge for us, is emergency wells. We not only have them in West Texas, which is what everybody reads about, but they're all over the state, quite frankly. The last 3 years, we have spent $10 million each year dealing with emergency wells. Otherwise, we have this biennium $22.75 million to deal with orphaned abandoned wells. That's what you, the legislature, have budgeted for us. This year of the biennium, we've already spent $9 million on 2 wells, and as of last week, we have 5 that just broke out. I don't have a cost because we're just now dealing with them. So we will exceed our budget and not be able to plug those 1,000 because we're going to stay within our budget. Why is this important, and what are we now looking at? As you know, when we get those orphan wells, we prioritize them. Today, priority 1 is we have about 15 on that list, meaning they need to be plugged. Priority 2, we have about 2,500 on that list. About 1,000 we think are environmentally sensitive for water issues and other issues. About 1,500 are environmentally sensitive because of H2S issues. And then the other 4,000, give or take, are priority 3 and priority 4. We're plugging them. They're coming on my books as fast as I can get them. So,
for the benefit of the committee, explain your priority 3 and 4.
Priority 3 and 4 are priorities for us. They are orphaned, abandoned, but they could be a hole in the ground with no environmental risk. They're on somebody's property. As we go out and plug and prioritize 1s and 2s today, and we are prioritizing 1s and 2s for us, if there's a priority 3 or 4 well out there, we're going to plug that well while we're out on site because that makes sense, right? It costs us, we do managed well plugging contracts. It costs us less to do them all in a grouping instead of running all over the state and contracting all over the state. So we do bid out and contract like the industry does. We get a little bit better cost-wise because we do manage well plugging. Our bigger challenge is this, what we've recognized, there are issues in, let's pick because we're sitting in front of 2 West Texas men, because in West Texas, for instance, that we are having wells that are flowing to surface, or whether they were plugged or they were orphaned or we know who the operator is. We are now looking at where environmental risks, even more so for overall the industry, as well as where seismic issues are, and we're prioritizing those wells even more. If you've got a well in some of those areas, it's going to cost you more too. So hence we're the $100 million. We want to continue plugging wells. We want to make sure we have enough money to plug wells, and we want to have enough money for emergency wells. And I cannot give you a straight answer today how many emergency wells I'm going to have year to year until we deal with produced water in the state.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of the committee, I'll just say that according to the data that I have, there are 115,880 wells that have been inactive for 1 year or longer. 115,000. Of that, there are 1 to 5 years, over 50,000. 6 to 10 years, 29,000. 11 to 15 years, 13,000. 16 to 20 years, 7,000. 21 to 25 years, 6,000. 26 to 30 years, 10,600 wells. And believe it or not, between 31 and 35 years, there are 4.
Yes, sir.
They're all in East Texas.
There's a lot. So I look today, and it's a policy issue for y'all over here to help us figure out what to do with inactive wells. I've talked to the former chairwoman who wrote the bill and passed the bill in 2009 and 2011. I saw her last week, and she said my bill didn't work. And I went, no, ma'am, we'd love some thoughts. So inactive wells today are at the highest number we've ever had. Y'all made a policy decision. I'm telling you what I need to implement your policy, and if you change it, I probably will come back and give you a different number. But you can, as an operator, continue to do appropriate testing and file paperwork at my agency, and a well can stay inactive for as long as that paperwork and that information, that operator's active. So we as an agency cannot force you to go plug in an active well because y'all set the policy over here. Okay. If you want to change that policy, we're happy to give you information, have that conversation with you.
Well, it's one of the priorities of this committee. So one final question, go back a little bit to the injection well permits. What have you taken to implement stricter regulations on the limits of injection well permits? Are you limiting permits, new permits, or are you just trying to focus on the already permitted wells in close proximity to the seismicity issues?
You're talking about UIC?
Yep.
Underground injection well. A combination of both depending on where they are. So
Okay.
if we've had a seismic issue, you're required to give us a lot more data before we permit. 2, we've shallowed up everything that was deep in those areas. Everybody's had to shallow up. Causes a different issue, but we've shallowed everybody up. And you ask, you're not seeing us issue as many permits in those areas. There's a lot more hoops you have to go through. We're limiting pressures. We're limiting volumes.
Okay. Vice Chair Morales, you have some questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairwoman, good morning.
Good morning.
In my visit with Chairman Darby and his team, it's also of quite importance, especially since I represent the district out in West Texas all the way to El Paso, the inactive and orphan wells that exist out there. I get to visit with 11 of my county judges. Many of them have raised concerns over some of these orphan wells that end up leaking out there, or as you know, Fort Stockton, which is Pecos County, has a big issue with one of those wells that's causing a depression in a part of the county. Has your staff come up with guidelines and measures to address the ongoing issue of the inactive and orphan wells? Do you currently have that authority?
I'm not sure what your question is to that.
Yeah, so with the numbers that Chairman Darby expressed, which I think that you agreed with, it just keeps growing through the years, the inactive and the orphan wells also. And it seems that we just keep putting a Band-Aid, and now I understand that you're reacting with, and based on the policy measures and the legislative bills that we passed and have requested $100 million. But it seems to me that I think that we should probably be addressing this as to what is the root cause of the issue so that it doesn't continue to pervade and continue to exist in future years. My goal, and I think that everyone up here will probably be in agreement with it, that we need to get to a point where the goal is that we are providing $0 to your agency because we have found a way to resolve these orphan wells without it costing the state money.
And we're willing to have that conversation with you, Representative. I think because it is a policy issue. So today there's a statute in place about how long and how a well can stay inactive. We as an agency cannot change that. You can if you choose to. To that end, orphan wells are a little bit different than inactive wells. So not all inactive wells become orphan. I can get orphan wells into my books from active wells as well. And there are also bonds associated with the operators. So there's a multi-pronged issue, and I appreciate you've got some challenges. That being said, some of what you were bringing up, that's why I asked you to clarify, some of the issues that you're bringing up as far as what we're having in Fort Stockton and other places are different as far as water issues. So we've got a produced water issue, which is separate than an active well, which is separate than orphan well. So that's why I asked you for.
Yes.
Kind of got a three things going on in one county, and we hear a lot from that county, and that's fine. And so we do know we've got some issues. Look, I think that if this legislative body and this committee chooses to deal with inactive wells, that will be a good step forward. But I know there's some legislation out there. Like, again, we're glad to be a resource and give you the information. I don't think it's going to be resolved tomorrow, by the way, because some of these wells didn't have bonds. Some of the wells that have bonds are smaller bonds, and some of them, these are bigger issues than we may have anticipated even a year and a half to 2 years ago. So these are a good step forward. We're happy to help you take, but I think you need to know that this agency will still be plugging orphan abandoned wells probably when we're all dead because there are that many wells. And I don't mean that in a rude way. Some of the wells that are also on my books were GLO permitted too. So, and those, that is a 153 of those, I think, out in the bays. This has been a problem as long as we've all been here. We would love to get it more manageable, though.
Yeah. And those are the concerns that I've expressed in visiting with industry leaders and regulators also have come to our office, as well as the people, right, that reach out to us from our constituents themselves. The bigger, and I can understand the enormity of the problem, right? And so many orphan wells. Let's just tackle the orphan wells alone. But at the same time, and listening and having my office open to industry coming in and telling us what they believe is the fix. You and your staff see this on a daily basis. Your agency is tasked with, regulating to a certain extent the industry, right, based on the guideline and the policy that we provide. If you don't have the authority, I would like to see what we can do sitting down so that we can formulate I'd like to hear more from your staff as to what you think should be the fix on this issue, with the goal in mind of what I just mentioned previously of like ending the funding aspect from the state level, because we find a solution to the root cause, let's say, of the orphan wells, whether it be increasing the bond requirements, whether it be determining the conveyances between, one owner that's developing the well and then transitioning to the other, because I understand that it ends up in your agency, 4 or 5, owners down the road, and with less financial guarantees at that point. And I don't know what we need to do, but I'd really like to hear from your agency and your people, because they see this day in and day out. And I think that we need to tap into that wealth and that knowledge that you all possess.
Thank you. We're happy to work with you.
Thank you.
Just for the benefit of the committee, we're going to have industry come up in another panel, I think the next panel. So we'll have some questions for the industry, but I would remind everyone here, the oil and gas industry pays for well plugging one way or another. They either pay for it going in, they have to post a bond, they have to post financial credibility. They produce oil and gas, it pays severance taxes goes into the Treasury. Treasury saves some of that in the ESF, some of it goes into general revenue. They pay sales taxes, they pay ad valorem taxes, the industry pays to plug wells. We have a situation where this is a mature industry over a number of decades, and we have businesses that have transitioned out of existence. We have well bores that have continued to deteriorate, but the idea, this committee needs to put our heads together with industry and the Railroad Commission to come up with a sound policy and how we don't continue to allow the current process to perpetuate inactivity on these wells. We need to move that forward as much as we can do from a legislative standpoint to encourage the industry to move these wells forward and take up the responsibilities that they know they have, and largely they have produced the desired results. They plug themselves tens of thousands of wells, so that's not a problem. Representative Dean, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Good to see you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chair Lady. Listen, I just want to make a couple comments. You and I have spoken, and I've been in the industry for quite a while. And the definition of orphan wells, to go back to our vice chair's discussion, they're orphan for a reason. They were abandoned. People walked away from them. They don't know who their daddy is anymore, right? They're orphans.
That's one way to
They
put it,
have
yes.
left the scene. And what do we end up with, right? We end up with some landowner that generationally never got a penny of money from the leases underneath the ground of his property, and sitting there with some well, and what do we do? And I think the chairman's already answered a couple other questions. The number, this thing's just exploding. It will continue to explode. And, all it takes is money, right? And as Chairman Darby just said, our industry pays for it in the front, they pay it for it in the back, they pay for it all the way around in the middle. We'll wait to hear from Chairman Staples over here in a little bit. But they also pay for it through the ESF. And if we're going to get ahead of some of these issues, to my colleagues, we've got to use some common sense. We need to look at what the oil and gas companies have already put. I mean, we're getting close to a point with the ESF. We better go to spending a little bit of this money. And as a fiscal conservative, I'm not wild about, I'd love to do, again, as the vice chair says, about not having to put any state money in. That's not going to happen in our lifetime with this whole orphan well situation. But we do have, the ESF money. I think you and I also talked about that you had a number of contractors lined up to do the work, and all of a sudden, some priorities may have changed, policies may have changed, monies may have changed. All of a sudden, they had to downsize. So when we call them to action, we had 110, now we're down to 30 people. So we need a really aggressive, proactive program in order for us to address this in a holistic way, in a big way, so we can really get out in front of it. And then we can work on policy stuff, that how someone walks away from a well, right? There's, like you said, the paperwork someone can keep doing year after year after year to keep a well sitting there that doesn't pump enough oil to put in a 5-gallon bucket. But by policy, by God, that's a legit. So, but it's gonna take a major lift, and hopefully this committee can do it, financially, to help get a really good start on this. You and I visited with the FTEs and your upcoming budget. We look forward to helping you support that. But when it comes to this orphan well program, it's going to take a heavy lift, and we need to do that this session. Thank you.
Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairwoman Craddick, thank you so much. I have a question in terms of, is there any collaboration with any of the bases, perhaps, in Texas, to cap some of these orphaned wells? Is there any federal types of collaborations?
We really don't do anything on the federal basis and work with them, no ma'am.
Well, not on the basis per se, but so Texas, we're military state USA, right? When we think about the implications of readiness for the state of Texas, and we think about the not only economic of abandoned wells, but also the environmental impact, I'm forced to think about the readiness of the state of Texas in general. With that would go our collaborations with our bases, like mine in San Antonio, Joint Base San Antonio. We have San Angelo's bases, and there's a lot of talent on those bases. Sometimes those talents look for community projects to do. Sometimes those projects could be for the great state of Texas, that they get an award and a ribbon for being a part of a project. So I understand that $100 million is the ask for capping some of these wells. But if we were able to also, in addition to that, figure out a way that we could collaborate with the bases to help us with this project and help clear some of the backlog. I'm not sure if that would be a possibility. I think so. Just based off of our own ops tempos in the military, we try to have that partnership as much as possible. So that would be something that I would like to suggest if it's not being done. But one more thing. If we ignore this, and we don't catch up to what's happening right now and give everything caught up, what could that mean for us in the next 20 years?
Look, I think we continue to make sure that the environment's protected. That's very important. You're going to continue, if we don't figure out what to do with produced water, I think that begins limitations potentially in where we're drilling. And those are some real challenges that I don't think anybody wants to see.
Thank you.
So we want to continue doing our job. And if you've got some direction on bases, we're happy to have try to reach out and do some conversations.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Representative Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, always good to see you, and thanks for bringing your experience and wisdom to the committee. And I'm actually also grateful to see so many on this committee have experience in this area. I'm a career technical professional, but for the benefit of the committee and those watching that may not know really what produced water is, if folks are thinking about this like it's water, it's a little bit different. So could you help us understand where it comes from and what it's made out of? Why is it such a problem?
So produced water, and I'm going to give you could tell me the definition better than I could probably. But produced water, we consider produced water to be water that comes back up the hole after you have drilled an oil well. Remember, we're using today a lot of water going down hole if we're fracking a job, but that water, plus water that was already in the field, in the zones, comes back up. And it's different depending on where you are, and the volumes are different depending on where you are in the state, which is why it's been interesting to regulate for us. But it can have benzene, it can have lithium, it can have chemicals in it. A lot of that water today is now cleaned up again and reused as we are using frac jobs, and this is brackish water, meaning it is not, we aren't using fresh water, that much fresh water in this industry anymore. So it's brackish water. It probably went down and we didn't want to drink it to begin with, but when it comes up, we really don't want to drink it. That water is being recycled and reused in the oil field a lot for wells. At some point, though, it gets too dirty or the volumes are too much, and that's where we're using underground injection wells. It gets injected. The goal and what we've seen some projects prove up is you can clean up that water and move it back into what we can consider beneficial use by, I don't know if it's true definition, but my thought is you're putting it on crops, for instance. And so we have several companies that are doing projects not just on private land, but state land as well. General Land Office has been helpful in some of these projects too. They're growing alfalfa and then they're testing it, for instance, to see what's in the soil, to see how it grows, and that it can be cleaned up and be reused. So that's the ultimate goal for a lot of this water. It's a process. And again, as Representative Dean said, it's all about money. But that's the goal. And I do think there's some real opportunity that West Texas could look like East Texas in the next few years with a lot more green if we can figure this out.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm glad that you brought up the recycling and reclamation. So anytime you tap into an asset that's subterranean, what comes out of the ground is some mix of oil, gas, water, and other stuff. So the water originally produced may not be that bad, but to your point, when we inject to either fracture the ground or we inject to loosen up the asset so that it'll flow better, we're injecting chemicals, we're injecting steam. As we do that over and over, it gets heavier and heavier. When we talk about heavy produced water, it's like thousands of times heavier than ocean water. It's super laden with chemicals. So it becomes a problem to handle, right? And eventually it becomes a problem to even recycle. It literally eats the metal of the equipment you're trying to handle it with. So what can we do to help promote the recycling and reuse? Because as you said, actually very smartly, that at some point we're going to have too much to contain. And just developing containment for this can be an issue. It's resource intensive. And it's not that there aren't enough holes in the ground, it's there aren't enough safe spaces to capture it and keep it, right? So reclaiming it, if you can get it to the point where you can put it on crops safely, that's great. If you can just get it to the point where you're using it again, that's great, right? But is there stuff that we can do to help encourage that? Because my understanding that technology hasn't quite caught up to the point where we can do that fiscally feasibly. It's a dollars and cents question, to Dean's point.
So I think you've seen industry and agencies and research organizations working through a lot of those challenges this year. You'll continue to see that, and there's a bunch of legislation being talked about and will be filed, I believe, that will start moving that process along even quicker. You can never be too fast, but it'd be nice that it was done 3 years ago, right? So the faster and more thoughtful without unnecessarily burdening or regulating an industry is helpful. Again, you're going to see us work with TCEQ because they do water as well, and a big piece of what they do is water standards. So we're working with them. They need resources as well. They forgot to ask for several years. We've asked, and so we've at least gotten some resources. And we need that partnership to work well between two agencies, to be very honest. So we look forward to that this process moving forward. This session, you've got lots of conversation whether there will be billions of dollars put in for water beneficial use. So I think there's a lot of opportunity this session as y'all are looking at policy questions.
Well, I'm on board. I certainly hope to be helpful.
Thank
They
you.
forgot to ask for money? TCEQ did? Or
They didn't
Sorry.
realize how fast this was going. In fact, we had an interesting meeting in my office in the summer, and we all recognized and knew that beneficial use and produced water was going to be an issue. It all of a sudden had to be the issue this summer. And so we've all strategically are asking for the parts that we believe we need to keep the projects moving forward and keep the process moving forward as agencies. They knew they weren't as innovative in going and asking for dollars and cents until the last couple of years. So look, they regulate a lot too. We regulate the whole oil and gas space. They regulate everything else. So making sure the environment stays clean for all of us and that we can work together on projects is going to be really important. We all need resources.
I think so too. And so lastly, is there a division of labor or a unity of effort when it comes to not just containment, but remediating when we lose containment? So in the case of a loss of containment, that this can be really not just stuff spilling out into the environment in large quantities. So is it the Railroads Commission purview to work on the remediation of that, or TCEQ, or do you all work on that stuff together?
If it's oil filled, it's us. And the operator, we make them go clean it up.
I hope so.
If it's not oil filled and it's other things, it's TCQ.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair.
Representative Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman Darby and Chairwoman Craddick. I appreciate you visiting with me. With respect to the $100 million appropriations request, I know under the federal funding, there was a significant investment under the Infrastructure Investment Act that Texas received federal funds to plug those wells. With the uncertainty of not knowing what this administration would do, how dependent are we on the state to cover any non-funding that we may not receive going forward?
So when the IIJA bill was passed, for well plugging, and there was well plugging dollars put in, part of the bill stated you had to have an active well plugging program in the state. We already do. In fact, we're the biggest in the country, to be honest. So we have 3 years ago received $25 million unrestricted federal dollars, as you know. We used that and plugged 730 additional wells. We then went back and told them we needed a total of $330 million for the 8,500 that were on my books when that piece of legislation was passed. We a year ago went and asked for the next tranche of money. It was $79 million. In January of last year, right before those dollars came in, Department of Interior, who's over the program, the lawyers got involved. I say that because I am one, and I can say that the lawyers a lot of times muck it up. So the lawyers got involved and added some more requirements onto it. Number one, we now have to ask Native American tribes and get their okay before we can go in and start a project. We have to get the Historical Society from Texas to okay our project so we aren't disturbing anything. And the third thing that was added was U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has to approve our projects, and they have a minimum of 40 days. So as Representative Dean was talking about, we were geared up to go. We were going to access the dollars, and we were ready to go, and had told our contractors that we do business with to get ready because here comes the money. We're off 60% in the dollars we've been able to use because of I would say, the sticks, not the carrots, that have been involved. As of today, with this administration, all additional dollars coming down have paused. We're in the process of finishing out the projects we were approved, but we don't know when or if they will open the dollars back up, and if they'll change the parameters too, which would be very helpful for us. I'm not sure you'd see us. We were the first state to ask for the second tranche of money. I'm not sure we would have been first had we known what was coming, to be honest.
Well, that's my point. Because we don't know if we're going to receive additional federal funding.
So our program
doesn't
has
that-
to continue.
Doesn't
Yes,
that
sir.
make us more reliant upon the state for the $100 million request that you're making?
Yes, sir, it does.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now we'll move on to the industry portion of our testimony and call our first panel.